Sierra Milton, a mother of 6, woke up on the 5th of January 2022 to discover that her eldest child, Zion Foster, had not come back home the previous night. Zion, a senior at East Detroit High School, had just turned 17 in November. Despite being like most teenagers with a rebellious streak, Zion had previously threatened to leave home and had actually done so the year before due to frustration with her mother's rules. Although she had returned home after a few days, the incident had caused enough worry for Sierra to contact the authorities, only for it to be a false alarm. Zion was grappling with her grandmother's recent cancer diagnosis and her own desire for independence. On that January morning, things were different. Zion had finished her shift at the Detroit Wing Company the night before and had asked for permission to go out after work. She had been honest about spending time with her favorite cousin Jalen. With these conditions in place, Sierra had agreed and watched Zion leave the house just before 11 p.m. The following day, Vertez Gonzalez, a high school student and the boyfriend of the 17-year-old, reached out to Sierra. He was concerned about Zion and mentioned that he couldn't get in touch with her. The last message he received from Zion was at 12:59 a.m., saying OMW, which stands for on my way. Unfortunately, Zion never made it home. All calls to her phone went to voicemail, and messages sent during the night remained unanswered. Finally, at 8:53 a.m., he messaged her asking, "Are you okay?" followed by "This is a terrible situation." Sierra was deeply troubled by the response she received from her cousin Jalen Brazier regarding Zion's absence. Despite her daughter's claims, Jalen denied being with Zion the night before. He questioned how often Zion mentioned spending time with him, to which Sierra replied, once or twice a month, expressing frustration. Jalen criticized Zion's deceitful behavior as sneaky and unsafe. He speculated that Zion might have been spending time with someone near his home, as her location tracking showed her near his house at 11:24 p.m. Vertez, Zion's boyfriend, who was somewhat insecure in their relationship, had evidence of her location at that time. Jalen proposed that Zion might have used him as an alibi while actually being at a neighbor's house. Although he advised Sierra to involve the police, he preferred to stay out of the situation. On the other hand, Vertez was persistent in confronting Jalen with the location screenshot. In response, Jalen shared footage from his Ring camera system, which showed no sign of Zion at his house. He firmly stated she was never there despite Sierra's efforts to report Zion missing to the East Point police. They did not prioritize the case due to her history of running away. Frustrated by the lack of support from law enforcement, Sierra initiated a search operation with the help of her loved ones. Flyers were distributed, rallies were organized, and media outlets were contacted. Eventually, officers were dispatched to speak with Jalen Brazier, who claimed to be Zion's favorite cousin but was actually her former stepfather's relative. He was related to Sierra's former spouse. At the age of 23, he was a father to 2 young children and was in a committed relationship with Katrina. Sierra was under the impression that her daughter and Jalen shared a close bond, but according to Jalen, they hadn't communicated in years. The authorities found him at his residence with his girlfriend, Katrina Smith. Jalen graciously welcomed the officers inside to conduct a search of the premises. He mentioned that he had last seen his cousin almost a year ago, in May 2021. Jalen went on to clarify that it was Zion's mother and her partner who were fixated on the notion that she had been with him that particular night. He even offered to show the Ring camera footage as evidence. However, the mother noticed gaps in the footage entries for the night of January 4th, which had been deleted. The East Point police found no suspicious activity during the search of the house, and there were no signs that Zion had been present. Jalen expressed his frustration at being dragged into the drama caused by a 17-year-old cousin with whom he rarely interacted. While Jalen may have deceived the authorities, Sierra Milton was not fooled. She observed her daughter's departure from the house and often greeted Jalen herself when he came to pick her up. She was aware of his deceit. To confirm whether Zion had indeed been near her cousin's house, as indicated by her location data, Sierra decided to check the neighbor's doorbell cameras. At around 11:15 p.m. on January 4th, a white sedan, known to be driven by Jalen Brazier, was captured entering his driveway. Two individuals, one male and one female, were seen entering the house. Jalen had dropped off Katrina at work just before 11 p.m. That night, as she was on the midnight shift at a manufacturing job that lasted from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., the female who entered the house at 11:15 could not have been Katrina. Phone location data later confirmed that the two individuals entering the home were Jalen Brazier and Zion Foster. Zion was not seen leaving on camera. At 1:41 a.m., the camera across the street captured Jalen pulling his car out of the driveway, then reversing it in the trunk facing the backyard. The car drove off after a few minutes, only to return less than 10 minutes later. Search warrants were obtained for both the house and the car. The house search yielded no results, but the car's contents were meticulously examined. Unfortunately, there was no concrete evidence regarding Zion's whereabouts. However, the cadaver dogs pointed directly to the trunk of Jalen's car. On January 19th, the 23-year-old, accompanied by a lawyer friend, voluntarily met with detectives. It was evident that he had not been truthful about his whereabouts with Zion a night she went missing. Jalen decided to come clean and provide his version of events. He admitted to picking up Zion from her home and bringing her back to his place. After putting his two young boys to bed, they smoked marijuana together, which made Zion drowsy. Jalen claimed that Zion appeared to fall asleep on the couch while sitting upright. He left the room briefly to get a drink, only to return and find that Zion's pulse had faded and her heartbeat had stopped. Instead of seeking help, he panicked, fearing he would be blamed for her death. Jalen led detectives to the dumpsters in Highland Park, where he claimed to have disposed of Zion's body weeks earlier. Jalen informed the detectives that Zion had been at his residence for approximately 2 hours before her passing. This would have indicated that her time of death was slightly after 1 a.m. According to cell phone records, her device disconnected from the network at 1:15 a.m., coinciding with the moment she ceased responding to messages from Vertez. Jalen assured the detectives that he had not erased any data from his device since Zion's demise. However, it was discovered that he performed a complete factory reset of his phone just 2 days later, effectively erasing all stored information. Nevertheless, the movements of his phone were able to be reconstructed. This data placed Jalen at the dumpsters at Highland Park at 1:48 a.m. He insisted that he had placed her in the dumpster to the right, but there was no longer any trace of her. During a subsequent interview on January 20th, inconsistencies in Jalen's narrative began to surface. He now asserted that they had consumed acid that night, suggesting that her reaction to the psychedelics might have led to her heart failure. This explanation was deemed as improbable as his earlier claim that marijuana had caused her demise. Despite the detectives' efforts to leverage these new statements to extract a confession, Jalen did not admit to any wrongdoing. Due to the lack of a confession and the inability to locate Zion, there was insufficient evidence to proceed with a murder indictment. Jalen was arrested and detained for one count of providing false information to the police, specifically misleading them about Zion Foster's whereabouts, well-being, and his interactions with her in June of that year. In a subsequent conversation with the detectives, only the audio was recorded. During this interaction, Jalen altered his story once again, retracting his previous assertion that they had taken acid that night. Other minor details of the narrative were altered. Zion was no longer depicted as unconscious on the couch. Instead, she was described as lying on the floor. The individual mentioned feeling pressured by law enforcement to provide additional details, leading to the fabrication of a more intricate story to satisfy their demands. The garbage collection trucks in Highland Park were monitored as they transported waste to designated sections in local landfills. Sorting through heaps of trash accumulated from various parts of the Detroit area over several weeks proved to be a challenging task. An estimated 8-week initiative was initiated. Numerous volunteers, many of whom were clad in masks and hazmat suits, and aided by heavy equipment, methodically combed through the layers of the landfill, searching for any trace of Zion. In the meantime, Jalen Brazier faced a potential 4-year prison sentence for his false statements to the authorities. The Detroit Police Department, in collaboration with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, continued their efforts to obtain a murder warrant. Jalen presented his case to the judge during his sentencing. However, he was ultimately sentenced to 23 months behind bars. Jalen's communications with his girlfriend Katrina and other relatives were closely monitored while he was incarcerated. At times, he utilized another inmate's calling code in a failed attempt to maintain privacy during his phone conversations. Additionally, he was found in possession of a prohibited cell phone, through which he exchanged numerous messages with Katrina. Throughout his calls, Jalen repeatedly inquired about any significant developments. This behavior appeared to be a thinly veiled attempt to ascertain whether the extensive search of the landfill had yielded any results. Jalen's preoccupation with finding Zion was evident. If his narrative was accurate and she had passed away suddenly from a non-violent and unknown cause, it would be in his best interest for her to be located. The swift discovery of Zion would serve to clear his name. The desire for her recovery should also reflect the sentiments of a caring cousin. Interestingly, time and time again, he expressed his gratitude that no significant developments had transpired in the investigation. As the conclusion of the landfill project approached, he referred to it as a quest for Cox. Jalen had completed just over 9 months before being granted early release, having been enrolled in a specialized 90-day incarceration program. This boot camp, fashioned after a military program, allows inmates convicted of certain crimes to rehabilitate themselves while incarcerated, and as a result, they are granted early release. Nearly a year had passed, and Zion remained missing. No murder indictment had been pursued, and the main suspect had returned to his home and family. However, Jalen Brazier's freedom was short-lived. On June 13, 2023, after a year and a half of investigation, the Detroit Police Department finally obtained an arrest warrant. The 24-year-old would face charges of second-degree murder and evidence tampering in connection with Zion's murder. Upon his arrest, 2 additional cell phones were confiscated. Despite his attempt to perform a factory reset on his device, investigators were able to recover some of the activity. Her search history had been stored in cloud storage. On January 7th, 3 days after disposing of his cousin's body in a dumpster, Jalen conducted a series of Google searches. Are garbage trucks also compactors? What is the force of a garbage truck compactor? How do police get your phone history? How do you know if police are watching you? In addition to these incriminating searches, investigators discovered that in the months leading up to the incident, Jalen had conducted a number of disturbingly suggestive searches for pornographic content containing the words cousin and step-cousin. Experts were able to retrieve the video results of these searches, some of which were reportedly very violent and graphic in nature. As the case approached trial, a preliminary hearing provided further insight into the additional evidence that had surfaced since Jalen's release. The recent hearing may have provided Jalen's defense team with a new perspective. During the hearing, Bertez Gonzalez testified that he believes his girlfriend was regularly taking medication for epilepsy. He mentioned that Zion informed him about her seizures and how they worsened without her medication. Bertez witnessed Zion briefly losing consciousness, slumping forward before recovering after a few seconds, which he suspected to be a seizure. However, Sarah Milton, who has a child with epilepsy, contradicted this claim by stating that Zion never experienced seizures. Extensive medical records spanning years seem to support Sarah's statement. Despite this, Jalen Brazier Div was now being reconsidered. It is possible that Zion's medical condition played a role in her sudden death at his residence. The possibility of a seizure was raised. Unfortunately, only Zion and the defendant know the truth about what transpired that night. Zion is no longer here to provide her account, leaving the defendant as the sole source of information. It is worth noting that his recount of events has been inconsistent. Despite attempting to dispose of Zion's body, digital evidence suggests a different story, pointing to a single explanation for why Zion was found in the trunk of his car that night: her murder. Additionally, Zion had a history of seizures and was on medication for them. On the day in question, she visited Jalen's home, where they consumed drugs. Jalen later informed the authorities that Zion had shallow breathing and a faint pulse. Upon checking her, he discovered that she had passed away. Fearing repercussions due to their drug use, which was illegal, he acted out of panic. Zion's phone lost connection to the network at 1:15 a.m. on the night she vanished, disappearing along with her. However, her previous cell phone was safe at home. Sierra Milton handed this device over to the police, revealing months of correspondence between Zion and her favorite cousin. The messages he sent varied from subtle and unsettling to deeply inappropriate, with some being sexually explicit. More than 4,000 distinct texts were recovered from Zion's old device. Among them, Jalen frequently invited her to his home while his girlfriend was away, offering to let her stay in his basement if she ran away from home. He even advised her on how to avoid the police if she decided to run away again. Wayne County Assistant Prosecutor Ryan Elsey described the messages as pervasive, sometimes praising her intelligence and appearance, while other times being immaturely probing. For instance, he insinuated that others believed they were a couple, claimed that his children's mother was envious of her, and boasted about his ability to attract women easily. He even went as far as calling himself a god. Prosecutor Elsey concluded that the 23-year-old had been grooming his younger cousin for years, harboring fantasies about her, and that on January 4th, he acted on his impulses, leading to her tragic demise. Jurors were informed that Jalen discovered Katrina's pregnancy with their third child on the same day he brought Zion to his house. Messages between the couple revealed that he had lied to her about his whereabouts after dropping her off at work earlier that day. Her persistent nausea and hot flashes prompted a visit to the emergency room, and despite feeling too unwell to continue working, she requested him to pick her up. At 1:25 a.m., she messaged, "I believe I should return home." At 1:26, "I am not feeling well. Shortly after, my stomach is hurting, I feel unwell and keep experiencing hot and cold flashes." Jalen's reply was simply, "You can do it, baby." He eventually picked her up that night close to 3 a.m. Upon picking her up, she noticed a deep scratch on his collarbone. He explained that the cat had scratched him deeply enough to draw blood. Oddly, Katrina thought the cat had never scratched that deeply before. The trial lasted a full 2 weeks. In May 2024, Jalen opted not to testify. The state presented 32 witnesses. The defense did not call any. The case against Jalen was mostly circumstantial, yet still compelling. A forensic anthropologist who examined Zion's medical history concluded that the only condition she had that could have caused her death was asthma, although an asthma attack would have shown symptoms opposite to what her cousin described. Instead of quietly losing consciousness and having a faint heartbeat, Zion would have been struggling to breathe. It would have been evident that she was in distress. Jalen reiterated his statement that Zion had informed him she had seizures. He also confessed that his girlfriend was known to exaggerate quite often. It appeared that Zion enjoyed fabricating stories. When he brought her to his house late at night on January 4th, 2022, behind his pregnant girlfriend's back, who was working at the time, he took Zion to his house late that night. She left that house in the trunk of his car on a night when he had an unexplained cut on his collarbone. Jalen himself claimed Zion specifically mentioned she had a history of seizures, and he understood that if she didn't take her medication, the seizures would be more severe. Sierra Milton and the rest of Zion's family anxiously waited as the jury deliberated. Prior to revealing his decision regarding the duration of Jalen's sentence, Judge Donald Knapp meticulously detailed the convict's refusal to acknowledge any accountability for the homicide, the disposal of Zion's remains, the deception of law enforcement, and the numerous obstructions caused by his deceit during the investigation. Abandoning his 2 young offspring in the residence, the father cunningly deceived and misled his relatives, ultimately acting in solitude. Judge Knapp expressed skepticism about Jalen's potential for rehabilitation. Consequently, Jalen Brazier was handed a 30 to 90-year imprisonment term for the murder, along with an additional 5 to 10 years for tampering with evidence, to be served successively. Zion Foster's body remains unrecovered despite the exhaustive 6 months search conducted by over 70 volunteers and law enforcement at the landfill, which ended in defeat. At present, Jalen is confined at a reception facility in Wayne County, awaiting transfer to the general inmate population.